My name is Glenda Tillery. I am 75 years old, and I was born in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. My birthday is January 6, 1941. I was the only one of the children born in a hospital. The reason was because it was a very bad, the cord was wrapped around my neck and I could not be born. So they had to take my mother to the hospital, therefore that I was not born at home.
So they started at home?
But I lived in Puxico when my family lived in Puxico when I was home, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so can you tell me about what it was like when you were a kid, growing up as the youngest one out of everybody, maybe what your parents did?
My brother, who was 16 years old when I was born, got married when he was 18, so I don't recall him being at home without his wife and family. That, of course, was during the years of World War II, and he was called into the service. His wife stayed with us, and she had a baby girl who is 3 years younger than me, so my niece is 3 years younger than me.
What did your parents have you do around the house? Did you have chores?
I was very spoiled.
Your mom did everything for you?
Well, I had one sister that was 12 years older and one that was 7 years older. So they did a lot around the house. I didn't. And after I grew up and they were gone, like when I started working, I would go to work, I would come home, eat my dinner, go get myself cleaned up and go out. Didn't do anything.
What was your guys' house like?
The house I grew up in, really, we moved there when I was in junior high. I went to Lincoln Junior High in Pontiac. And the house I grew up in was a two-story house. Bedrooms all upstairs, living room and dining room and kitchen down. And just
It was a pretty normal house?
Mm-hmm.
What about your parents? What did they do?
My dad he had a lot of jobs. He worked on the Mississippi River for a while, on a barge doing stuff, and then he worked as a civil engineer building levees along the Mississippi River, which some of them are still holding the river back to this day. My mother was basically a housewife most of the time. There were periods that she would work out of the home, but for the most part she was a housewife.
What would she do if she worked outside the home?
She had worked in a laundry or a cannery. Neither of them were, had higher education.
Did you guys have animals?
No. I had a dog when I was little, but my parents did not like animals in the house.
You guys didn't have any farm animals or anything?
No, we never lived on a farm after I was up any age. We lived in town. Okay.
What about starting when you first started working? Can you tell me about your working life?
My first job was at Neisner's Dime Store, and I worked in the pet department. So in the morning when I would go in, I would take out all the dead birds. It was wonderful.
How much did you get paid?
I can't remember how much I made there. But after I graduated,
From high school,
I got a job at Fleet Carrier Corporation, and I made $1 an hour. I was paid every 2 weeks, so I made $40 a week. And with that, I bought myself bedroom furniture. I bought pots and pans that I'm using right now. I bought my mom and dad a kitchen table and chairs. And I bought gas and went out and had fun.
What about after that, working?
Well, I started working at Fleet Carrier in 1959. I met your grandfather in 1961. So I didn't have a very long time to work in there before I met him. but I continued to work after we were married.
What about that kind of work?
Same thing. I worked at Fleet Carrier. I was a typist, and then I had a very good office manager, and she would make sure that anytime there was something to be learned, or she could move me up in any way, she would make sure that I got that training. So I went into accounting and payroll, and after I was married and I was expecting your Uncle Doug, no one had worked there after they started showing where they had to wear maternity clothes, because there were truck drivers all over, and she would say, they make comments, so after you start wearing maternity clothes you cannot work. So at that time I had to leave. Well, a week later, the only other girl there that knew how to do payroll broke her leg. So I got to go back and work until time for Doug to be born. And after that, the girls worked when they wore maternity clothes.
Interesting. So you kind of started the trend.
I did.
What about, did you do that until you retired from there?
Well, I was gone a couple of years, but yes, I went back to Fleet and I retired from there. I started when I was 18 years old there, and I retired from there.
And then how long did you work for the camp up in Kalkaska?
I think about 11 years.
Can we go back a little bit, starting from your education, and just tell me about, briefly about where you went to school and stuff?
Okay, I started school in Missouri, and we moved up here when I was in 4th grade. I went to school in Waterford a couple of years, and then I started junior high at Lincoln Junior High in Pontiac. Then I went to Pontiac Senior High. At that time there was only one high school in Pontiac. Now there's Central and Northern, but at that time there was only one, and I went to Pontiac Senior High. I took a college prep curriculum, and I added some business, like I took typing and shorthand, and so in case I didn't go to college, which I was pretty sure I wasn't going to, I would have some, skills to work.
What was your graduating class?
What year you mean? 1958.
Did you like school?
No, I hated school, and I hated school for my kids, and I hate school for my grandkids.
Did you do any groups or activities or clubs at school?
Yes. I was in the girls' selective choir.
Did you go to prom and stuff like that?
I did not go to the prom. I was asked to the prom by a young man in my neighborhood, but he wasn't the one I wanted to go with. So I put off answering him, and then I didn't get asked by someone I wanted to go with, and by that time he had asked somebody else, so I didn't get to go to the prom. Let me tell you about my first date.
Okay. With Papa?
No.
Okay.
No, my first date ever.
Okay.
It was with a kid that grew up in my neighborhood, and he had gone off, he was in the Navy, and he came home on leave, and he asked me out, and I went out with him. That was my first date.
What did you guys do?
We went to a movie.
Do you remember what movie?
I don't remember what movie.
Did you have a good time?
I did.
So,
and until I started going with your grandfather, I always went out with sailors.
When people were dating around the time that you were dating, would you call each other boyfriend, girlfriend, or would people kind of date a few people at a time? Or what was it like dating people?
Well, if you were free to date whomever you wanted to, but then they would call it going steady if you were only dating one person.
So could you date one or two people, and then before you were going steady, was that okay to maybe go on a date with two different people? And then how long do you think people would date for until they
started going steady? I don't know how long people would, but I met your grandfather at a New Year's Eve party, of course, January. I started dating him in February, and after I started dating him, I never went with anybody else except one date I had made before we started dating. And after that, I never went with anybody else. So met him in January, we were engaged in June, and married in September.
What was your guys' engagement like?
It wasn't announced in the paper. He asked me, and then we went and talked to my parents. And
So he asked you, just the two of you?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like in front of anybody or anything?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds nice. What about your wedding? What was your wedding like?
My wedding was in the church I had grown up in. It was they were redecorating at the time, so it did not look as good as it usually did, but we only had one attendant each. My sister stood up with me, Nadine, and his friend Bill Perry stood up with him. And none of Papa's family was able to come, except one stepbrother who lived in Detroit.
Why weren't they able to come?
Because they lived in Alabama, and
Too far?
they didn't have time off work or the means to come.
What about your family? How many people came?
Just the ones that lived here. My brother who lived in Arizona and my sister who lived in Missouri didn't get to come. So my sister that stood up with me is the only one that was here. And I don't remember how many guests we had, somewhere between 50 and 100. 1961, September 22nd, 1961. And I was 20 and Papa was 22.
What was your life like after being married?
Well, I tell you what, it was it was difficult getting used to. I was a new bride. Mm-hmm. Right away I was pregnant. I was not used to having to keep house and work. So it was a big surprise to me.
Mm-hmm. What would Papa do? What was his role in the marriage and the household?
He did not do things in the house, you know that. At one point, he was laid off, and so he he did decide to clean at that time. So he cleaned the living room, and he taped it all off so we couldn't go in there.
So nobody could make it dirty again?
Yeah, but he did the outside stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I worked on the inside. He did not do a lot of housework.
How was it after you learned to get used to keeping house? What was it like having a husband and 2 kids?
Challenging.
Was there a community that you could kind of lean on, or other family or neighbors and stuff, or was it mostly just you taking care of the kids?
No, my mother was wonderful, and she kept my children while I worked, which I don't think I probably would have worked if she hadn't, mm-hmm. because I really didn't trust anybody to take care of them except her.
Did you guys do a lot together, like with the kids?
Mm-hmm. Everything we did was with the kids. The people that we were friends with, the couples that we were friends with, all of them had children, and we would get together at somebody's house, and everybody would bring their children. You know, we didn't get babysitters and go out very much. We just met at somebody's house and, you know, had fun together, played cards or something, and we had our children there. We didn't get babysitters very much.
You like to involve them?
Mm-hmm.
What about, did you guys go on a lot of vacations together as a family?
Yes, we did. We went west a lot. We went down south a lot, and went to New York World's Fair and sometime in the early 1960s. We went on a lot of vacations with extended family, with my sister and her husband and my mom and dad. And we would go in a van and just all go together, and it was a lot of fun. When we were first married, mm-hmm. before Doug was born, we lived with my mom and dad. when he was 2 weeks old, we moved out into our own apartment. That's when reality hit, and it was difficult working and learning how to keep house, learning to cook, because I had helped my mother cook. You know, I'd be in the kitchen working with them, and I would do what she would tell me, but I wasn't paying attention. I was just having fun. And then when I was out on my own, I was not a good cook like you, Lauren.
So it maybe wasn't as typical as other people at the time, or was that what most people did?
It was pretty typical, I think. I think maybe a lot of girls were more prepared because they helped out more at home. And I have to say I was spoiled because I was the baby.
Would you say that it was worth it to get babied when your mom was taking care of you and then have to learn it when you were out on your own, or? It was nice.
Yeah, because you know what? I had the rest of my life to learn it.
Exactly.
That was the only time I ever had in my life when I was free of responsibilities.
So what kind of places did you guys live after you moved out?
First place was next door to a cemetery. It was not very nice, but that's what we could afford. When we first got married, your grandpa worked at a garage, and I worked at Fleet Carrier.
Because he was out of the military then, right?
Yeah. I know his feet froze when he was in Korea, so that from the rest of his life he had, like, his feet would get cold, you know.
Did he talk about being in the service, or not really?
Not really, but he was a paratrooper, and the reason he was is because that paid $50 extra a month.
Do you know what he was in? Was he in the 82nd or the 101st?
He was in the 101st. And you remember the 101st came here?
That was nice.
From Kentucky, yes. Yeah, he was in the 101st, and he even jumped with a broken leg and a broken arm because it was before I was with him. But that's Papa jumping out an airplane. When I met your grandfather, I had been going with a guy for 4 years.
So how did you break the news to that guy?
And I was with him the night I met your grandfather, yeah. But it was kind of an off and on thing because he was a cheater.
So how did you break up with him? Did you tell him about Papa? How did he take it?
He had talked to my mom and dad about it. He was certainly sorry that he had done the things he had done. Too bad.
Too bad.
In February, after I had met him at the party, it was in February.
Was it a coincidence that you met him, or were you planning on it?
No, well, we were both at a wedding. He was friends with the groom, and I was friends with the bride. And so I went to the wedding with this guy that I had been going with. But your grandfather kind of followed me around, and he said, "Behold my love, she cometh through the garden yonder. What does she bringeth me? Something to make my heart grow fonder." And this guy was with a set of bucking a ship. That's what she's bringing you.
When was the first time that you realized that you were in love with him?
Probably by the time I'd gone out with him, maybe a month.
That's nice.
But after my first date with him, I knew I didn't want to go with anybody else.
So you guys lived next to the cemetery. What about after that? How many kids did you have when you lived next to the cemetery?
Just Doug. And then we were able to buy our first home with 4 rooms. It was next door to a school, and it was after we moved there that your dad was born.
What about after that with your houses? Did you live there for a long time?
We lived there till your dad was ready to go to kindergarten. And then they started busing in Pontiac, and they might bus children across town to a school not even in your area at home, you know. And so Doug and I moved to Waterford.
How did people in your community feel about that busing?
Everybody was upset because, not because they were integrating schools, but because they were moving children. You know, we did not want our children to have to ride a bus. And when we rented or when we bought our home, that was a consideration for us. And so they were going to bus them anyway someplace? No.
So you moved? And where was that you lived?
We moved to Waterford. That's where your dad started kindergarten. And we moved there, or we lived there in that house until he was in high school. And then we moved over on Barker, the last house we moved to there, before we retired up north.
And you moved to Kalkaska when you retired? How'd you guys like that?
I did not like it because it was too remote. I grew up in Pontiac. The houses were close. Your neighbors were close. I like being able to look out the window and see my neighbor. Or I like, if I need help, to yell and my neighbor would hear me. So.
Well, how close or far away was the grocery store to Kalkaska?
In Kalkaska, probably 15 miles.
And was it like an actual grocery store, or was it small or big?
It was an actual grocery store, but if you wanted anything besides groceries, you had to go 35 miles to Traverse City or to Gaylord. So, you know, I did not like it up there, but it was pretty up there. And I liked it when we would go on vacations up there, or, you know, before we moved up there. I really liked it, but I did not like it. And I found the people kind of clannish.
So before you retired and went up there, what kind of stuff would you guys do around the house? Like, what kind of cars would you have, or what kind of things would you get yourselves?
Your grandfather was a gearhead. He always had new cars. So he bought, every year we would buy a new car. One year I had a, what was it called, Firebird. Had a big bird on the hood. We always had nice cars. Grandfather had a red Corvette once.
Did you guys take care of the cars? Like, would you drive them hard, or would you go easy on them?
Your grandfather always took very good care of our cars. Kept them, you know, the engines, kept them clean, and you know, the oil changed. He always took very good care of his vehicles.
So would he do the work himself on the cars?
He was a very good mechanic.
Did you buy your son's cars? What kind of cars did they have?
I can't remember what their first cars were, but we bought their first cars.
So you guys would buy yourselves cars, and was that really the only thing that you would splurge on, or?
Well, we had, like, you know, furniture and and things like that we would replace, and you know, I thought we had a pretty good life.
Thinking back on your life, what was a favorite time in your life that you can think of?
I can tell you my very favorite Christmas.
Okay.
It was, I can't remember the year, but it was when we were still living in our first little 4-room house that we had bought, and we had, you know, our pay had increased to the point that we could afford a few things for the kids. And I remember that Christmas we had gotten some Christmas decorations for outside, and we had bought Christmas decoration for their room, and gifts, you know, special gifts for them that year. And it was just, that was my very favorite Christmas with them.
When you guys would have Christmas, was it just the 4 of you, or would the grandparents or aunts and uncles come?
we always had Christmas with my mom and dad.
And that was at your guys' house?
At my mom and dad's house. And Nadine and Don would have Christmas there too, my sister and her husband. We always had Christmas dinner there. You know, we'd have the kids' Christmas when they would wake up Christmas morning at our house.
So was Christmas for you guys more of a religious thing or more of a holiday thing?
Both. Yeah, both.
Would you go to church?
Not on Christmas Day because our church didn't always do that, you know, but they would celebrate Christmas, the Christmas season.
What kind of church did you go to?
Baptist. When your father was a little boy, you know, if he was acting up in church, he would have his hand in mine and I would stick my fingernail in his hand a little bit, you know, and instead of just quieting down, he would, hey, hey!
So, overall, were they good at church, though?
Yes.
Can you think of, in addition to that, kind of a time that you really have fond memories of?
I would say all the time before, like, they became teenagers.
When they were little kids?
Yes, when they were little, yes.
And you would make them stuff, too, like you would knit them mittens and everything? And
hats, make Halloween costumes, stuff like that, yeah.
You were always making sure that they had a lot of things that they needed.
Whatever they needed, yeah. Yeah, Doug and I think we always put our children first.
What about the things that were going on and rather the economy or, you know, with the presidents or society at different points in your life? Can you think of anything that kind of stands out in your life that was rather really good or really bad with any of those things?
Well, I think the years that your grandfather and I had to work were very good years economically. Unions had become strong, and work was good. It was after World War II, you know, and after the Korean War. And just as I was getting out of high school, the Vietnam War started, and a lot of boys from my class were in Vietnam. Some of them did not come back from Vietnam. So that war lasted, you know, a few years there. That was a bad time. Your grandfather was in Korea before he was out.
And was he back before you guys met?
Yes, he had already been in the service, and he came up here to find work because at that time they didn't have shops and all down south like they do now. The industry was all that was up here, and he came up here to find a job. He came up here with his brother, but his brother went back and he stayed.
Why did his brother go back?
Because he was homesick and stuff. He didn't care about staying.
How many brothers and sisters did he have?
There were 9 of them.
And they were from Alabama?
My parents both grew up in Missouri, yes.
What did they do when they were younger?
Farm.
They farmed. And then they were able to get away from that and do the engineering stuff when they had you?
Yes. When I was, before I was school age, before I was 5, my mother became very ill. And at that time, they would either put tuberculosis patients in what they called a sanitarium because it was contagious, and or they would send them out west, like to Arizona and California, to a dry weather, you know, and we had to go, we had to move to Arizona and California. And at that time, we looked like the Jodes.
So that's what she had, tuberculosis?
Yeah, well, yes.
What did you think about her medical care?
Honey, I don't recall that. I was like 3 or 4 years old, so I really wasn't aware of so much. But I remember that. See, that was during World War II. People were very patriotic. So we had a 41 Ford that we were traveling in. There was my 2 sisters, my sister-in-law, her baby, and my mom and dad and me.
So how many people is that in the car?
Well, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And as we were traveling across country, if we would see a soldier hitchhiking, we made room for him. How we did that, I do not know, but we did.
Was that a fun time with your sisters and stuff?
It wasn't so hard on me because I was young. I doubt if it was a fun time for them, because we lived in a tent city. We had a box that we used as a table. However, if we had had a table, we would have known where the dishes went and what fork to use, because we were always very, my mother and my oldest sister were always stressing manners, etiquette.
So, were your sisters nice to you then?
Absolutely. They were wonderful older sisters. They would take me to the movies with them, or if they went out like kids go out driving around trying to meet other kids, they would take me with them.
That's nice. And how older were your 2 sisters?
My oldest sister was 12 years older than me, and Nadine was 7 years older than me. Nadine was like a second mother to me. She thought God sent me for her.
Did you guys share a room, or?
Oh yes, we shared a room and a bed.
The 3 of you slept in the same bed? How was that?
Well, you either all turned the same way, until we moved into Pontiac, and then we had Nadine and I had a bedroom, and Margie had a bedroom.
And how many people were living with you there in Pontiac?
In Pontiac, Mother and Dad and Nadine and Margie and me.
So just the girls and your dad?
My dad was always with we girls. My brother was gone when he was very young. So I remember my dad, even though he was a small man, and he was pretty masculine. He was a very strong man. He would go up in the bathroom and powder his face.
Was he vain?
Had some feminine, and I think it was because he lived with women, all girls. Yeah. Was he vain? He was not a good-looking man, but women liked him.
Was he charming?
I guess, maybe.
Tell me kind of about like your parents' marriage. Like, is it people at that time? Is it like marriages now, or was it different?
I don't think it was different. My father was not. My father was a much better father than he was husband. And his later years, he started to help my mother and stuff in the house. But the years that I was growing up, he was very much the boss. What he said went. And but it changed when they got older, after the children left.
Yeah. I think that kind of matches up with like the time periods too. I feel like it was more of like a patriarchy in the family back then. Was that what it was like in your guys' family when you were married and had kids, or was it more equal than your parents?
I think your grandfather always had the last word. You think he did too, don't you? I could get in a huff, and I wasn't always passive and went along with what he said. I had my say, but it didn't really matter.
What would you guys argue about? Like the kids that you would clash with, or just everything, or?
No, we did not argue about what we did with the children, and if we argued, the children did not know it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course we did, but we did not argue in front of the children.
Was it basically whatever you wanted with the kids?
Well, we pretty much agreed on, both of us wanted whatever was best for the children, you know. So we pretty much agreed on that, but your grandfather pretty much had the last say.
Was it always like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll have to say that when the children were first born, I did not trust him to take care of the children. Like, if I had to go out someplace, I remember I had to go to the laundromat. I didn't have your dad yet, but Uncle Doug was there. And I had to go to the laundromat. I didn't have a washer and dryer. And so Doug was going to stay home and keep Doug. And I was worried to death. I said, no, I'm going to take him. And he said, no, you're not. I'm going to keep him here. Which he did. But I was sick because I didn't trust him to take care of my baby.
Mm-hmm. Did he change diapers?
Maybe one time. Had a pretty good life. Except that I loved your grandfather with all my heart. I miss him every single day.